So Russia says that they have taken all of Pokrovsk and are now consolidating their forces for future offensives. That doesn't really line up with what we're seeing on the ground, but there are Ukrainian accounts who just today said the situation in Pokrovsk is, quote, dire. Now, starting out with Syriac map here to give you an idea of how Russia is presenting the current status in the battlefield, because Syriac lines up pretty much one for one with assessments coming out of the Russian Ministry of Defense. We're going to be focused in this area here. So we've got Pokrovsk in the middle of the screen, Dobropilia up here just to the north. Rybar says, quote, in the Dobropilia direction, units of the center group of forces are advancing in several sectors. And talking about up here, they say significant progress has been achieved in the area of Toretsk, the very tip of the map here, where heavy fighting for Shkov and Sofiivka have been ongoing for a long time. Judging by the dynamics of recent battles, regrouping after liberating Pokrovsk and Minograd is close to completion. As a result, the center group of troops is increasing the pace of attacks on the northern flank of the Dobropilia direction. The entire front section may soon be in motion. So the assessment coming from Russia right now, seemingly out of nowhere, like it's been very little progress in recent days, weeks, and months in the Pokrovsk direction. And then all of a sudden today, hey, Russian forces are regrouping, preparing for the next phase of offensive operations in Donetsk. I don't know. That seems a little optimistic. In fact, I think it's worth looking at this map here. We'll zoom into Pokrovsk specifically and show you how drastically different these two mapping services show the current status of the fight. So if you're Russia and you're using this map right here, and you say, hey, we've got all of Minograd, we've got all of Pokrovsk, it makes sense that you would then push through a little bit, advance through the objective, and consolidate your forces on the northern side of these towns. That's kind of the standard pace of any fighting we've seen in most conflicts, certainly in this one as well. That's not really what the battlefield looks like right now. If we go over to Deep State map, which I think gives a clearer view with some of these gray zones being heavily contested, and we look at that same area, not only are Minograd and Pokrovsk not completely under Russian control, but the gray zone extends pretty far to the west. I mean, look at Rodinsky up here. They're saying that is still partially under Ukrainian control, partially in the gray zone. That's an entirely different set of planning that needs to be done if this is the current battlefield versus this. And again, we'll have both of these maps linked in the description below if you want to go back and forth from one to the other, because again, what we've seen with Russia in recent months, more than earlier, it kind of spiked for some reason, is false reports influence how Russia operates on the battlefield. In fact, just earlier today, Rybar was complaining about Kupiansk, situation up a little bit in the northeast, saying that direction remains one of the most problematic due to the continued false reports being sent up. He said more efforts to stabilize the information war have been taking place than trying to stabilize the actual front. So when we're looking at some of these claims from Russian media that do not line up one-to-one with what we're seeing from Ukrainian channels, something to keep in mind is some of these reports might be falsified, might be exaggerated, and it's entirely possible we see something like we saw up in Kupiansk over the course of the last couple months. Now, turning to an assessment here and some footage from Deep State, they say the city, talking about Pokrovsk, continues to be engulfed by the enemy, who in addition to infantry is actively bringing in his military equipment, deploying electronic warfare systems, and deploying his pilots in the area, who actually control the logistics of the Pokrovsk-Minograd area with drones. In particular, Russian pilots have completely occupied the area of 9-story buildings, which allows them to control logistics within a radius of 10 kilometers. They say the Ukrainian Defense Forces are trying to hold the northern outskirts of the city with their last strength, using drones to attack the infantry and attempting clear-up operations, but is becoming increasingly difficult to operate in Pokrovsk. Again, very different picture being painted here. There's no illusions that Ukraine is in control of any territory up here in the northern portion of Pokrovsk, but if you are a general or a senior officer and you're trying to put together planning for the next phase of operations or even the next 24, 48 hours of operations, it is very different if Ukraine is actively contesting this and still has ground elements in Pokrovsk conducting operations against Russia versus what we're seeing on Syriac map being relayed across Russian channels that this has long since been under Russian control. Very different planning for the next phase. Deep State continues by saying, quote, thus the last point of support, Minograd is a more difficult situation due to the active pressure of the enemy. So shifting a little bit to the east here, showing this pocket that remains. At the same time, Ukrainian pilots have limited opportunities to operate in Minograd as the enemy conducts raids in the rear through Rodinsky, up here to the north. They say attacking our pilots' positions. The city itself is under constant fire control by the enemy, as well as all logistics, which complicates any movement there, but there is no order from higher military leadership to withdraw. Thus, the last point of support for any path lies through Rodinsky. This is the only means of resupplying the folks in Minograd, and as we zoom in, you can see there are no roads there. So this is cross-country, likely dismounted, maybe ATVs, maybe motorcycles. They say the enemy knows this well and is actively putting pressure on this settlement to occupy it. However, the fire control in the area has essentially closed off the possibility of peaceful movement. Another way of saying this is that the only way for troops to come and go is to fight their way in or fight their way out of Minograd. This pocket has been a challenge for Ukraine for months now, and the same thing for this whole area. I mean, again, Russia starting out by saying they have taken all of Pokrovsk and taken all of Minograd. We heard reports from Russia claiming that months ago. So it's still, from what I can tell, is heavily contested, but it's definitely trending in the wrong direction for Ukraine. The understandable direction, given the volume of manpower that Russia has thrown into this cauldron. In fact, Bakhmut Demon, a Ukrainian military officer here, said, quote, "It's getting harder and harder to hold on to the part of the city in Pokrovsk. The enemy is increasingly bringing in live ammunition and military equipment. Their assault troops are running to Hryshyne and getting wiped out. The situation is dire." So Hryshyne here to the northwest, and we do have some updates there. We also saw that just in the last couple days, Russia has started bringing in refurbished Western equipment. So we saw a Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. We saw a Mike 113 armored personnel carrier. Both of those likely provided by the United States. I think a bunch of countries provided the 113s, but either way, both are U.S. military equipment that have been captured, and we've seen that a couple times throughout this conflict. I'd be surprised. I saw this question popping around. I'd be surprised if Russia is able to put the Bradley into full operation. They might have a couple 25-millimeter rounds to use, but no solid resupply of that. So essentially look at that as just a modified troop carrier. Based off of how Russia's been using these, they'll probably put some people inside, pile a few more on top. Now, we got an interesting video in this area, again, talking about the attacking Russian forces northwest to Hryshyne from the 7th Rapid Response Corps, where they said after a failed mechanized assault, enemy troops managed to infiltrate the village of Hryshyne and attempted to dig in on its eastern outskirts to break into the rear of Ukrainian positions. Thanks to close coordination between the 155th Separate Mechanized Brigade and other units, the enemy was detected in time. And this is where this footage is pretty interesting. They say the Leopard 2 tank crew was deployed to eliminate hostile infantry hiding in residential buildings and farm structures. The remaining enemy forces that broke through after the assault were neutralized. The video here, they say, shows first-person combat footage from the Leopard 2 crew of the 155th Separate Mechanized Brigade on the eastern outskirts of Hryshyne. This is like probably the most forward we've seen tanks used in quite a while. A couple months ago, there was some footage circulating of another Leopard operating in Pokrovsk, hammering Russian positions as they tried to advance through the city, but it's risky moving tanks this close to the front with the volume of, or the drone density over this part of the battlefield. Now, a quick update on the fundraiser. I announced this one yesterday, and we're rocking it already. I think we're at, 12,000 euros. How about that? Less than 24 hours. You all are insane. So this is the biggest campaign I've ever done. This is one part of 6. So we're trying to outfit an entire Ukrainian battalion. It's a company, the Seraphims, part of the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade. They were so effective as a drone company, they've been asked to scale up to a battalion. And we, all of us together, are providing them vehicles for that transformation. We're doing this every other month. There's going to be a campaign through Cars for Ukraine. Incredible organization. I've worked with them before. Just a few weeks ago, I was able to hand off some of these vehicles in Ukraine, in Kyiv, that they were making their way out to the front. And these guys do a really good job of sourcing quality vehicles, making upgrades. They add armor protection to certain areas of the truck, and then they have them fully serviced. So when they show up to the units in Ukraine, they're ready to go. They don't need, and we've seen this countless times before, the cheapest possible vehicle gets purchased, and by the time it gets to the unit, there's like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 worth of stacked up repairs that need to happen, or the thing's going to break down on its first mission. That's awful. We're not doing that. We're not messing with that. We're getting these guys high quality vehicles that will operate as they need them the first minute they arrive on position. So if interested, in the description and pinned comment, I'll have a link to this campaign. We've got a really nice video from the battalion commander and soldiers of this unit saying thank you all for your support. And we've got some cool looking patches, I think. This first one, the Angel of Justice, a unique patch for this campaign. Then we've got a unit patch from Seraphim, and then some battalion, brigade, and company level patches here as well. And for you high rollers, of course, I saw the last campaign. I know there's plenty of you that jumped on this, which is wild and so humbling. 2,500 euros or above, you get your name or a logo or a sticker, whatever you want, in memory of, in support of, in honor of, anything like that on the side of the truck. So interested, able, the link in the description and pinned comment. But I'm excited to keep this one going and can't wait to share with you guys as we continue to rock this. Again, 12,000 euros in a day, get out of here. So this one's going to be moving right along. Now, I do want to step back and talk about the kind of bigger picture ceasefire conversations ongoing right now, because just earlier today, the delegations between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States met in Abu Dhabi. However, it does not look like we got a lot of information out of that meeting. No real leaks, from what I can tell, about progress that was made in any direction or lack of progress. Interpret that however you will. Usually there are leaks, and we've seen leaks come out in both directions, but this one seems to be pretty buttoned up. It does look like they're going to continue the conversations again tomorrow. Now, one of the hot topic items here, of course, is territorial control. We've talked about that quite a bit. Security guarantees is this other piece that it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of progress, but the Financial Times just reported a couple days ago that there might actually be something here that Ukraine and their Western partners have agreed upon. Now, hear me out on this one. They say Ukraine has agreed with Western partners that persistent Russian violations of any future ceasefire agreement would be met by a coordinated military response from Europe and the United States, according to people briefed on the discussions. They say under the plan, 3 people familiar with the matter said a Russian ceasefire violation would trigger a response within 24 hours, beginning with a diplomatic warning and any action required from the Ukrainian army to halt the infraction. If hostilities continued beyond that, a second phase of intervention would be initiated using forces from the so-called Coalition of the Willing, which includes many EU members plus the UK, Norway, Iceland, and Turkey. If the violation turned into an expanded attack 72 hours after the initial breach, a coordinated military response by a Western-backed force involving the United States military would take effect. I have zero confidence that will actually work out. I mean, for one, what is what is the terminology they used here? Hostilities continuing, expanded attack. So if this attack continues for 72 hours, what does that mean? Is that one missile strike every 24 hours? Is it infantry just constantly moving forward in the assault? Is it continuous artillery or drone fire? Do you see any way at all that Russia might be able to take advantage of that and just, I don't know, maybe once a week or something, carry out an attack? Large-scale drone or missile attack, and further degrade Ukraine's ability to deter future Russian aggression. Not a lot of confidence that this would actually hold up. And again, waiting for 72 hours after the attack takes place, and now it is a continued attack scene, and then the United States might. Look, I wish that this was more ironclad. There's a reason that NATO is so valuable and has been so important to really keeping us out of World War III for the last 50 plus years, 70 plus years at this point, 75 plus years, right? Because people believe in that, and they trust that NATO Article 5 is ironclad. This type of thing, not so much. In fact, when it comes to these security guarantees, it looks like even the Ukrainians are kind of skeptical that these are actually going to play out. There was a poll conducted by the Kyiv Institute or International Institute of Sociology where they asked if Ukraine withdraws its troops from the territories of the Donbass and these territories pass under Russian control, would you do this in exchange for the U.S. and Europe to give Ukraine security guarantees? So this is one of the big questions. And it seems like something the United States has laid on the table for a while that could be something that could reach a deal. Ukraine gives up the territories that Russia wants in exchange for security guarantees. That's the whole question. It doesn't say NATO style. It doesn't say this thing that was put together in the Financial Times. 52% of Ukrainian respondents found that totally unacceptable. 31% found it difficult but acceptable, and 9% found it fully acceptable. It's a tough selling point right now. I mean, that's split, to say the least. But even that is talking about these hypothetical security guarantees that we still aren't really even seeing the framework of, let alone if they actually would be effective. So, even within Ukraine, if President Zelensky today said we're going to hand over the Donbass and hope that this Financial Times reported security guarantee comes through, the majority of Ukrainians are opposed to that. Think about that for a minute when we see these peace talks continue. And now Politico took this another direction, saying Ukraine is actually preparing for no security guarantees, which I would argue at this point is probably the smart move and probably in their best interest. They say Ukraine fears that it cannot rely on security guarantees from its allies in any potential peace deal, and so must be ready to stand alone as a steel porcupine to ensure that Russian dictator Vladimir Putin will not return for another attack. That means a permanent, massive army, heavy investment in the latest drone and missile technology, and domestic arms production. Without NATO, Ukraine has to rely on bespoke agreements that may not carry as much weight as the alliance commitment. Kyiv is wary of such deals, having been burned by promises made by the United States and the United Kingdom when Kyiv gave up its nuclear arsenal in 1994, pledges that turned out to be hollow. And they quoted Timothy Ash, an analyst studying Russia and Ukraine, who said, quote, "Would Trump go to war with Russia over Ukraine? Absolutely not. Would Trump sanction Russia for breaking any ceasefire? Very unlikely." And I think that's pretty clear. I mean, if we're not going to initiate any sort of military force, even when some Russian drones are penetrating NATO airspace, if we're not going to layer additional sanctions on, remember, those are still out there. Lindsey Graham said they're ready to go, and they were like 8 months ago. If we're not even going to do that to try to pressure Russia to the negotiating table, nobody in their right mind would look at this and say, yeah, but next time the U.S. would be there. Yeah, but next time they really would stand up and enforce this ceasefire. It's just, I wish that was the case, but if you're Ukraine, there's no real reason you can bank on that being different this time around, right? And I'm speaking in terms of the U.S., but let's be fair. From Ukraine's perspective, it's probably hard at this point to look at any one of their Western allies and say next time is definitely going to be different. We've heard a lot of talk about the coalition of the willing, very little action. And I know it takes time. I know it's complicated, and there's a lot of bridges to cross, a lot of hoops to jump through. But, that conversation started a long time ago, and it's just been a lot of meetings. A lot of talk, not a lot of walk, not a lot of action backing that up. So the ceasefire talks or the peace talks are continuing. Ceasefire's not a thing. Sounds like it might have been for a few days. Actually, on that energy ceasefire, it sounds more and more like President Trump just said it. Like, that's kind of my assessment at this point. Ukraine seemingly didn't know what all it was going to be encompassing. Russia seemed to think that it was only going to be going for a couple days. Trump seems to think that it went for 7 full days. None of that really lines up at all. But either way, the talks are continuing. It's good that they're talking. I think that's a net positive. Rather be engaging in conversation than not. But it's still hard at this point to hold out any hope that there's going to be real progress on the territorial control or the security guarantees. And again, even if these are the security guarantees, is that going to be enough for Ukraine to give up a big chunk of territory? As of now, probably not, but it's something to keep an eye on. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.